Good morning, Hemshech Ayin Beis, volume 3. We are at the bottom of page 1429. And the new paragraph began to explain, Ubir Inyan Hanal, that the concept of shinui, meaning an impact on the divine levels, is in Malchus. So even though the hashpah, the transmission of the divine, comes from higher levels, but where is there that engagement, that type of commensurate relationship is in Malchus. And the way Malchus manifests in Matat. So to explain that, went into the explanation of a Zohar, the beauty of Zohar, a beauty of a Zohar, on the pasuk v'hu mesibes mesaper b'tarbelesov l'fa'olam, that God so-called turns the wheel as he manages and governs existence. And he explained what that means, like the Zohar gives the example of a potter's wheel, like that the molder of the clay has a wheel which he can shift and change the shape accordingly. And how is it shifted and shaped? Based on Maisa Tachtenim, on our actions. As he explains, not right here, but in other places, the same idea, that through our actions, our merits shape that the flow should be through chesed, and the opposite of merits, transgressions, is that the flow should be through gvura, which is judgment and severity. So that's and that's, so bottom line, we see this level, which is called Malchus Tiklah, which is the meaning of Galgal, a Galgal sha'uman esabeas klei cheres, and that's the Malchus, that the level where the divine energy manifests in letters, like I said, Esis Hadibur, that create and relate to existence, because the letters are like spoken letters. Even though God does not have to speak, he can create just with thought, or not even with thought, just create. But he wants letters because the letters relate to the letters, as he explains in Sharichat V'Amuna, are defined, tangible letters that each one of them channels the energy. Oyer, the letters Aleph Vav Reish channel energy of the divine energy, which is Bligvul, into Oyer. And the same thing, Rakia. That's why we say Shmoya Sheyikra B'Lashon HaKodesh. The name of something is the channeler of the energy that gives it life and sustenance. So that's Malchus. Now, then he said the Kavonas HaMaimer. What's the Kavanah of the Maimer of Zohar? What's the Zohar coming to tell us? The pasuk already tells us that God so-called turns the wheel and of I don't want to say wheel of fortune, I was about to say, but turns the wheel of governing, as I said, like a potter's wheel. So what is the Zohar? He says the Maimer of Zohar is coming to explain to what level we're able to reach with our maisim. When our actions below, what level does it actually impact? Now we know it reaches all the way up to the top, to Etzem, to the Atzmos, but we're talking about where it impacts in a way that you can talk about, like we have an impact on each other in a relationship. There's a clear impact. Two people who love each other have direct impact on each other, both positively and negatively. So he says that's where the Zohar is coming, because higher than Malchus is mipi elyon leseitza haras. The concept of evil, or gvura, let's start with gvura, which will ultimately evolve into evil, it doesn't exist, is not there higher than Malchus. Like he brought mepi elyon leseitza haras, lo yigur chara, because ein ra yer lo maila. Because God is makar hatev ha'meitiv lakel. He's the source of good and does only good. And he explained in the parentheses that this is referring to Eid Ein Sof, that's higher than Atzilus. So there, for sure, there's only the Eid Ein Sof HaBligvul. And even Arich Ampin, where there is Gevura, but he says it's not defined Gevura yet. It's not discernible and it's not yet distinguished. There's no Ischalkus. But Av Chesed, it's Chesed. Similar to the way it is before the Tzimtzum, the Koyach HaGvul, before the Tzimtzum, is only a power, but it's all submerged within the bligvul of the divine omnipresence, the divine consciousness before the tzimtzum. and based on the Torah. So even though there are levels before the Tzimtzum, but nevertheless, they're all encompassed in Ein Sof Mamish. And based on the Torah that Kesed, he says, B'chlal, the Kesed B'chlal kum b'chinas Ein Sof Shalifnei Tzimtzum. Kesed in general is like the Ein Sof before the Tzimtzum in general terms. So based on that, Yesh Leimer, he says that Osa Arichampin, you don't see yet the gili of the Gvul or the Gvura. It's only Chesed. And indeed, even in Atzilus, where Gvura does become an entity, a defined entity, this Chesed and Gvura, what still dominates, he says, is Ikr, but he said the word expression is the Gamchins Atzilus, Hari Ikre hu b'chinas Chsadim. It's primarily Chsadim in Atzilus before we get to Malchus. And for sure in Atik, his line before that, he said, if Arich Rampin is that way, Atik is less smaller by Atika, so there's no Gvura altogether. In Arich, there's Gvura, but it's not yet defined. In Atik, there's no Gvura at all. So bottom line is, so we see from this that higher than Malchus, that it's all Chesed, it's all Gilu, it's all Eir, it's all goodness. It's only by Asrusa de Latata Shalahem that the people's Asrusa de Latata, through our actions from below, that we stimulate, and they're capable of drawing down Dinim v'Gvuris from above. And to the point that with the Riba Ishtalshlus, it becomes Nasa B'chinas Ra Gomer Lamata. Becomes literally totally evil or totally negative. And I explained yesterday, though he didn't say it here explicitly, what that means. That it is due to our actions or our lack of action or our misunderstanding or confusing the Tzimtzum as an end in itself. So that behavior that will lead to behavior that can create, that is a dissonant behavior, like Adam and Chava, not listening to what God said, and in turn drawing down. Eitz Hadas Teverah would have been a fine tree if they had not eaten from it. As a matter of fact, it says in Sfarim, Chassidus brings it, the Rebbe brings it, that had they waited a few hours, according to the opinion that it was a vine, they would have made Kiddush on the wine of Eitz Hadas Teverah. The problem was that they were told not to eat from it and leave it be. And as a result, they brought the beginning of Ra into this world, which we know is the beginning of self-consciousness. That's why they recognized they were naked and so on. That's why God says, Ayeka, where are you? Basically dissonance. Once there's a dissonance, a split between the whole purpose of the Tzimtzum is to create an independent consciousness in order for us to have free will and for us to be able to accomplish and be a partner with God in creating a Dira B'Tachtenim. But if it's misunderstood and we take our independence to the point where we wander away from our calling, we betray our mission. That's the beginnings of the of distorting the Tzimtzum, the Gevura, and that can draw down now. Even though Ein Ra Yered Mulmaila, because Mulmaila everything, as I said, is Chesadim, like he said, but because in Malchus it reaches our Ma'aseh Tachtenim, in turn that wheel turns then toward Gevura. That leads to judgments and severities, up to the point that when there's enough ishtalshus, meaning enough concealment after concealment, like I explained yesterday, it doesn't begin the first day after Adam and Eve ate from the tree of knowledge. It's not like the world was filled with evil. It took generations, 10 generations, till it became Mola Oretz Shaches, Chomos, that the world was filled with crime when the Mabul came, as he brought earlier. So you see, it's a process. You wander off a bit, then after a while, you wander off. Like the Rambam explains in Hilchos Avodah Zarah, right in the beginning. What does he say? He says, how did idolatry come into play in the first place? Everyone knew there was a God, one God. But then people said, we want to have something we can relate to. God is invisible. So they looked at the stars and they saw the stars are definitely God's creations, God's agents, as we've learned, Kechavim Mazalis. And they began giving it, so to speak, attributing to it power, understanding that it's God's so-called instruments. But then as the generations passed, the instruments became an end in themselves. You forgot about the captain of the ship, so to speak, the one who's running the instruments. And then that was also enough. So they started building shrines below, a tree, a stone. And then came shamans and gurus and priests who began also commercializing it all. So bottom line, over time, God was replaced with what initially began with an intention was to relate to God through his creation. But once you start worshiping the axe and not the axeman who carries the axe, the tool, the instrument, and not the one who is the master of the tool, that ultimately leads to Avodah Zarah, which is Ra Mamish. An example of how, after a lot of Ishtalshlus, you get to Ra Mamish. And as I explained, once that concealment takes complete hold, and people have lived that way for many years, you have wars, injustices, every form of genocide. The worst of the worst happens. The abuse that people can perpetrate against each other would only have been possible, would not have been possible in a world of Eid Ein Sof before Atzilus, or even in Atzilus, because there it's all Elikus. Like you said, it's all Chesed and Tev. Even the Gvura that is submerged or primarily controlled by Chesed, by Gilui. It's only in Malchus, where Malchus is already beginning to, the Elikus is beginning to get more concealed. There, the Maisa Tachtenim, our actions down below have impact, which in turn draws down the Gvura as Gvura without the Chesed, the Goli. It's hidden in there, but it's not the Goli, and that can lead to all the negative things that we're describing here. That's what we've learned. Now, I want to just point something out, something interesting I found before we continue on. I mentioned that this whole piece, he begins, is based on Yuvam Api Mashkos b'Mokamacher. That Mokamacher is that this is actually the language of the Tzemach Tzedek. A lot of this piece that we've learned is almost word for word from the Tzemach Tzedek. It's not the Rebbe Rashab's original writing. The Tzemach Tzedek and Biuri Hazayar on this Zohar, as I mentioned, page 31 and on. I also mentioned that mimer of the Tzemach Tzedek is based on a mimer of the Alter Rebbe, but the same Dibra Maskal again. Who misibis misapik b'tach b'leisov, which is in Tovkuf Samach Hey, Shabbos Parshas Vayera, I believe. Let me look. I have it here in front of me. I believe it's Parsha Vayera. Anyway, I was looking into it because I see there too a lot of the language we're talking, Kavonis HaMaimer and so on, is from the Alter Rebbe originally. Yeah, because the Zohar is Parsha Vayera, so that week, we know the Alter Rebbe would say for a number of years, Friday night, he would say a mimer on the Zohar of that Parsha. So on Parsha Vayera, that year, Tovkuf Samachei, which I said was the year 1805, it's really 1804, because it was still before the new year, the secular new year. So that year, on Parsha Vayera, he said this mimer. And it's the basis of the Tzemach Tzedek, which is the basis of this Ayin Beis. But then, I just happened to be looking, and I see that mimer follows a different mimer, which is called V'neshev Bagei, Mul Beis Pa'er. If you remember, a few pages back, when he spoke about that Malachim, the Kirvayim, they're the intestines, the gut, that processes the food and distributes it. Like that example, and that's also Lamaila, that's what the Malachim do. That he said, look in the Maimer V'neshev Bagei. So I had seen the Maimer from the Tzemach Tzedek. Then I realized that Maimer is also based on a Maimer right before Lech Lecha Tovkuf Samachei. So the week before the Vayera Maimer on Iyuv, on Mesibas Mesapik B'tach B'leisa that we're learning now, is the V'neshev Bagei. So, that's hard to say it's a coincidence. So I'm thinking that the Rebbe Rashab is actually showing us how the Alter Rebbe, week after week, was developing this sugya, because it's all connected. Remember, this whole idea with the wheel and the process of the wheel where there's shinui is because he's talking now not Atzilus, he's talking how Atzilus goes into Biyah, Atzilus, Malchus of Atzilus, and Matat, and how the angels draw that energy down and also elevate the energy. They're the processors, so to speak, like the ministers we spoke about. So, but then something more interesting. So I decided to look back even further. The first mimer, Noach. So there's Noach Lech Lecha Vayera. What does that mimer talk about? How do you like this? It talks about the idea of Tiklah. Tiklah, the wheel, that he talks about in Vayera. So, in looking at these three Maimorim, Noach Lech Lecha Vayera, Tovkuf Samachei, 1804, tells me, again, it's hard to imagine this was just coincidence, that that the Rebbe Rashab is actually basically taking all these three Maimorim and showing how they're all connected. So when you learn it in Tav Kuf Samachay, you see the connection somewhat, but in Ayin Beis, it becomes very apparent because it's all about this topic about how from Atzilus comes into Biyah, and the Tiklah, the wheel, the potter's wheel, that is the process, that is the way God governs the existence, which is very much through the angels that transmit that the chesed or the gvura. If you remember earlier, he spoke about the malachim that bring that ava v'yira, they carry ava v'yira into our souls and so on. They're the transporters or the delivery, however you want to explain it. So I just wanted to point that out. Still want to look at it a little more in depth, but that's very clear. That's what he's talking about in these Maimorim here. Okay, that's just a interesting point to make. I quite never seen it quite that way, that three Maimorim, the Alter Rebbe, in 3 weeks are really ultimately one flow. And then Ayin Beis, he brings it literally in one, this Hemshech is the whole continuation from back on page 1425, and now we're on 1429, is all on that theme, Okay, with that, I'm ready to continue on. So we're 3 lines from the bottom of page 1429, and we will start. The pages can be found, if you want to follow the text, at ayinbeis.com. So the line begins Gomur Lamato, La Gomur Lamato, and this, again, the language of Esus Latato, the parentheses of the Rebbe Rashab's addition about Erein Sof, Atik, Arich, and Atzilus. But all the other language is straight from the Alter Rebbe, as cited by the Tzemach Tzedek, including the Asusa de Latato. It's almost word for word. I think it is word for word. Maybe when we finish the subject, we can look at it if you want. We'll see. I'll see if it's worthwhile doing. But regardless, it is there. And now he continues. The next piece is from the Tzemach Tzedek. Alter Rebbe doesn't talk this medrash, that Tzemach Tzedek adds this. So let's continue learning. V'zehu Moshe Kosav. The medrash Eicha. So again, we're talking Eicha. The pasuk was Eicha v'hu mesibas mesapich, and the memena leiseitz memena haroyis is also from Eicha. So he says, and this is what it says in medrash Eicha. Al pasuk mepi elyon leiseitz haroyis. The pasuk he brought before, from a pi elyon, from the supernal mouth, from the mouth of above, meaning God, divine mouth. Leiseitz haroyis. Evil will not come from there. Evil doesn't come from God's mouth. Actually, he says, Leiseitz hareis v'hatev. I see. I'm not sure, but okay, let's see where he's going with this. The pasuk, I think, says Leiseitz hareis v'hatev. That I didn't realize. If someone want to look up the pasuk Leiseitz hareis mepi elyon?
I just did. It's an Eicha Gimel pasuk Lamed.
What's the whole verse? What does the whole verse say?
It literally says mi pi elyon lo seisa haras v'atov.
V'atov as well. Okay, fine. So till now he only quoted the first part, the reis, because that was what was relevant. But the full verse says reis and tov. We'll soon understand what that means, because seemingly everything that comes from above is good. He said tov v'chesed. But the pasuk says leiteitz hareis. So he brings in the medrash now.
He's asking, by the way, he asked it as a rhetorical question. At least
doesn't matter. It's all right. Because here he's saying it as a statement, not as a question. Okay. So the medrash on Eicha says, Amar Rab Elazar probably. So the Medrash says like this: Mishah she'amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, from the time when God stated. So we have the pasuk in Chumash, in Dvarim. Re'ei in the Pasharei, Re'ei nasati lefanecha sachayim. Behold, I give you before today. I present Re'ei nasati lefanecha. Now he doesn't say today here, but in pasuk it says Hayim. I give you the good, the life. And then he continues also the opposite of life. He doesn't quote the second part. Lo yotza teva le'esei ra, v'ra le'esei teva. From the time that God said, I've given you before you, I've placed before you the path of life, the life, not esachaim, life. So after that, lo yotza teva le'esei ra. To those that do evil, that perpetrate evil, God does not do good for them. V'ra le'esei teva, and doesn't do evil to good people. That's the statement. I know the immediate question is, what do you mean? We see why good people suffer, and we see bad people prospering. But that's what he says. Ela teva le'esei teva. He does good to those that do good. That's what the Medrash says. Uba Medrash reish Pasha Re'eh, and the Medrash, in the beginning of Pasha Re'eh, on that pasuk, Isa, Ela me'eleha hara ba le'esei ra, me'eleha me'eliyahu. Just not to make any confusion here, just give me a second. I'm going to look in the Medrash. I'm going to bring the Medrash here. 1 minute. Okay, actually, I didn't even go to the Medrash. I looked in the Tzemach Tzedek. So first of all, before we continue with the next Medrash, Pasha Re'eh, let me just quote the Tzemach Tzedek. The Tzemach Tzedek adds a line. Not sure why the Rebbe Rashab did not include it, but he says in Matnas Kohuna, which is a commentary on Medrash in Eicha, he says, Pirish Matnas Kohuna Shakol Nimshach Lefi Pu'ulas HaMakabel. That what he means by the Medrash, that after Hashem said, Re'ei Anoichi, and there he brings actually, Nasati Lefanecha, Esachayim V'Satev, V'Samoves, V'Sara. What does it mean? Lo Yotza Teva Le'esei Ra? It means that everything is based on our actions. Our actions generate, good actions generate good from above, and negative actions generate negative from above. Then he continues. The Medrash, Reish Pasha Re'eh, Isa Elam Eleha, not Eliyom, sorry, Eleha. It means automatic. It's an automatic process. Let me just see how he says it here. Yeah. Me'eleha Rabba Le'esei Ra. In other words, it's like it's an automatic cause and effect that negative energy comes Le'esei Ra, next page, 1430. The Teva Le'esei Teva. Just like Midah connected Midah, tit for tat. That's what the Medrash says. Me'eleha. It's like built into the system, just like, God forbid, somebody eats poison, it's automatically going to cause damage. Somebody eats healthy nutrients, it's automatically going to make them healthier. That's how God built it into the system. That's what the Medrash adds in Reish Pasha Re'eh. I'm just comparing the two right now. V'hainu, says the Rebbe Rashab, and that means Kamesha Amr Razal, Kedushin Daf Mem Amid Beis. It's like Razal say, the sages say in Kedushin, the Gemara 40b, Kedushin, Osha Mitzvah Achas, Ashrav, a person performs one mitzvah, so Ashrav, he is praised. Sheichriyas atzmei. Because ichriya means when you have like a scale, he tipped the scale, ichrias atzmei lekav zchus, to the side of merit. So we see from this that when a person does something good, they tip the scale from above. That's kav zchus, that they should merit, that they receive the merits from above. That's what he quotes here. So what do you see from this? That's basus latata talia milsa. He's bringing the proof from these medrashim here that this is not coming from above on its own. That once God designated it this way, it's a part of the system that our actions generate a response. Call and response, cause and effect, action, reaction. That when we behave a certain way, that in turn draws down a particular type of energy, positive or negative, based on the behavior. Just want to see that the Tzemach Tzedek brings more medrashim here. Okay. Next, any questions before I continue? I'm going to go to one more piece from the Emek HaMelech now. It's also from the Tzemach Tzedek. Tzemach Tzedek definitely has more details than the Rebbe Rashab. The Rebbe Rashab is citing, obviously, that which is most relevant to what we're learning here. So he doesn't have to bring all the midrashim. Okay, next. Ube'emek HaMelech. So we have proof to what he said before, that this is not, Tov v'Ra doesn't come down automatically from above. It's dependent on our actions. What he said earlier, that Lamaila, in Atzilus and higher than Atzilus, all the way to the highest levels is Koli Chesed. What he meant there is that the energy there is a Chesedic energy. But here we're talking about the relationship with the creation. So the relationship of Tov v'Ra, as we receive Chesed or Gvura from above, is dependent on our behavior, as the Medrash emphasizes. Ube'emek HaMelech, Emek HaMelech is famous Sefer of Kabbalah from Rav Bachrach. What was his first name? Eliyahu, maybe. I forgot his first name. He's from the students of Rabbi Sol Sarug. I mentioned a number of times. It's a Kabbalah of another student of the Arizal that the Rab Chaim Vital and some of his students and some of his Mekubalim that from his school of thought rejected. But Chassidus brings from both students. So Emek HaMelech Shar Reisha de Zohar, Perek Nun Beis, Daf Kuf Nun Zayin Omid Beis. He gives us both the chapter and the page. So in chapter 52 in Shar Reisha de Zohar, page 157b, Pirush, he explains Mipi Elyon, that when you say Mipi Elyon, what's the level of Elyon? What's Mipi Elyon? What level is it? Koi al Arechampin. It refers to Arechampin, like we learned before in Keser. V'gam al Zoh, shenikra Elyon ba'atzilus. And also it also refers to Zoh, because it's called Elyon ba'atzilus. In Atzilus, Zoh is higher than Malchus, so it's called Elyon. But P Elyon therefore means either Arechampin or Zoh. V'hainu, as we said before, Kanal, because Zoh ikrech chsadim. The primary force in Zoh, even though there's Gvura, is chsadim. In Arechampin, the Gvura has not even become discernible or distinguished. So it's for sure Chesed is the dominant force. That's Mipi Elyon. And that's why they say it's Areus, like we said earlier. Nothing negative comes from there. Gvura is still submerged in the Chesed, if there is any Gvura. Elo, Aide Maisa Tachtenim. So since from above there's no such thing as negative energy, so where does it come from? He says it comes from Maisa Tachtenim. However, through Maisa Tachtenim, Shemagiyim B'Pchinas Malchus, She B'Pchinas HaTiklah, our actions that reach directly, impact in Malchus, which is the Tiklah, the wheel that we learned about before, the wheel that God turns as he governs existence, and it turns according to the shape of what? According to the shape of our actions. That's where that's what causes Pevara Chesed Gvura to manifest. Just checking here in the Biri Azer. Let's see what he says here. Interesting. Here he says Dafko from Zayin Amar Aleph. Here's Beis. I have to look that up. Fine. Pirish Inyan Pirish. Okay. Yeah, maybe worthwhile learning the Biri Azer afterwards because he does elaborate more details. But let's first finish here. And now the Rebbe Rashab concludes, going back to the Zohar. And this is what the statement in the Zohar that we began in Vayera is coming to explain. Be'in halos man shalamata ad heichen hu magia. That's what the Zohar is coming to teach us. That halos man, which is another word for asusa dilatata, halos mayin nukvin, the feminine waters from below, which means the stimulation from below, asusa dilatata, which means generated from below. So the Zohar is coming to explain that heichen hu magia. To what level, how high does it reach our Aveda? Directly. We're not talking about indirectly, and we're not talking about that God has nachas in the deepest levels. Where does it have an impact? That's what the Zohar is coming to teach us. Not just that God is governing the universe. That is the level of Tiklah, the level of Malchus. But Eimer, and the Zohar says, Shemagia rakad b'chinas Malchus d'Atzilus. It reaches only till Malchus of Atzilus, Mokar Anivrayim, the source of the creations or the creatures. Sha'at shemagia halos man shalamato. Up to there, our stimulation, our effort that we generate reaches. V'lo yeser hagbom l'mayla, and not higher than that above. That's, so to speak, the place it reaches, and not higher than that above. Or lo yeser agavei l'mayla, or agova l'mayla. Either way, it means not higher and above. So that's the Zohar, which is coming to explain what he said earlier about Shinui, that and his spilas that takes place in Malchus of Atzilus as it manifests in Matat and travels into Biyah. Now he's going to explain this, but I'll stop if anybody wants me to clarify anything of what we learned so far. Okay.
If Zohar is the, so to speak, the potter, and the Tiklah is Malchus of Atzilus, and it says here our actions only can reach up to the Tiklah, the Malchus, the pottery wheel. So, but the shaping is done by Zohar, as I think you said, use that as an analogy. So, how are we affecting? We want to affect the pottery maker. Not, or maybe not. Maybe just affect the pottery wheel.
That's exactly what I said yesterday. The Mittler Rebbe explains that when the potter itself is not affected by the way he shapes the pot, the keli. However, he'll shape it according to our actions. In other words, if what we generate is merit, schus, mitzvah achas, so in turn that affects Malchus. So the potter will then be shaping Malchus, the Tiklah, in a way that's going to draw down Chesed. And if God forbid the opposite, it'll draw down Gvura. So he explains the changes happen in the wheel and in the pot that is created out of it, the result. Not the potter, but the potter is ultimately, everything is coming from the potter. He's the one that manages it all. But the way God set it up in a system is that the divine energy on its own is kulei chesed, like he said. Also teivnat. meaning as it transmits into existence. And the way he set it up is that in existence, like I explained the other day about Kriyas Yamsuf. Why is it koshik Kriyas Yamsuf? For God, it's not difficult to part the sea, but God created a system that he himself is a divine system that he respects. And that system is that our actions are what generate the chesed and gvura into existence. So right now, that's what he's saying on that level. What happens on higher levels, I explained a bit, but I'd wait till the Rebbe Rashab explains it. He's already explained it earlier, and I quoted a bit of it. But right now, the focus is on that process. Like he said before, that there's no ispilus higher than Atzilus. It's only God's power to have rachmim, it's power to have chesed. In Atzilus even, he said, it's not ispilus from another, it's also removed. It's only ispilus because now there is a tangible, there is an entity called rachmim. So there's ispilus in the sense that he's engaging with an attribute. And then in Malchus of Atzilus is where the engaging with existence takes place. And I explained in the interface that all these levels are necessary if you want to have a full relationship. But the focus here is now, yes, on the wheel and on the pot, so to speak, on the clay that's being shaped, based on the posuk and based on the Zohar and the explanation of that Zohar. It's ultimately the Alter Rebbe's explanation of the Zohar, explaining the posuk in Iyuv. Okay.
So could we say there then that the Zohar, the potter, he's going to do chesed. He's the best.
Well, let me define. He said that. He said like this: Kutshebrichu, who's the one that turns the wheel, so to speak, is Erein Sof Hamislabish B'Zoh. I just want to be exact. Erein Sof. Let me see the exact language. Hamalubish B'Zoh D'Atzilus. That's Kutshebrichu, the one that turns the wheel. That's how he defined it. Yeah.
So we then say that the potter is good. His tov is definitely predominant in Zohar. That the only gevurah really is manifested in the pottery wheel, in the clay, the keli there that's being made. So can we say that in a sense that the potter is trying to do the best job he can do with the pot and the wheel, and that we cause, but God forbid, by a bad action, a defect, so to speak, in the pottery wheel or the pot itself, and the potter is going to do the best.
I wouldn't put it that way. I would put it this way: that God created existence, He manages existence, but He gave a certain area for us to have free will, and we control what flow will come from the pot and from the wheel, whether it's good or not. Good is also up to us. That's why it says, it's when we do mitzvahs and we do merits, that in turn affects Malchus, and God is responding to us. Meaning through the wheel, He's responding if it's good. Or if it's not good, then yes, then we're causing that the pot, you can call it the defective, you can call it defective, or you can call it the severities and the gvuras that He's describing.
Rabbi, could you just repeat where is that location of the pot, the wheel and the pot?
He said like this: Tiklah is the potter's wheel, is Malchus, as it manifests in Matat, as it enters into Biyah. Kutshebrichu, which in this case is the one that's, if you want to call him the potter, you can call him the potter. The one that's turning the wheel is the divine infinite energy as it manifests in Zoh of Atzilus. So it's still Atzilus. So God manages existence. God runs the world. He could have made the world without free will. So if you think of the sun and the moon or the animals or all creation, that's completely dependent on how God put the clockwork in place. That's the program of existence. But then He put a human being on earth, and the human being He blessed with the gift of free will, the ability to control our destiny. An animal does not control its destiny. Neither does the sun or the moon, neither does the stone, neither do the trees or the birds or the fish or anything in Daimim Tzemeach Chai. We control our destiny. Our actions matter. The process, the dynamics of that is what is how it works. The concept is something many times. He's just putting it into the exact levels. So when we do an action below, there's going to be a reaction. That reaction happens in Malchus. That's where the shinui is. Malchus, in turn, is only Malchus of God. It's just God's instrument. In this case, the wheel. And that's the example, because when you're turning the pot can change shape. Can change this way. That's what you say, biyada hine kechemer biyada yetzer. And he says, his power, larech or lakatzer. We say Yom Kippur night after Shemoneh Esrei, the hine kechemer, that they're just like the clay in the hands of the potter, and he has the power to shape it this way or that way. So too are we in the hands of God. But the additional element in Iyuv is that our actions, control the destiny of how it will be shaped. Your life will be shaped based on your actions, basically.
And what about past actions? Or is that getting off track?
You're talking about if you could do tshuva?
Yeah, in other words, like
we know you could do tshuva. He's not discussing
what
it
are
here.
we experiencing
Of course,
in
you could
this
do
life?
tshuva.
No, I know. But what I'm saying is, okay, so they say, we're here to do tshuva for things we did wrong before. So there's like another
just
level.
want to say that's not the discussion here.
All right, I'm sorry.
You're asking the discussion that you're asking about is a whole discussion of its own that God did put. But listen, just because a system was put into place, it doesn't mean. Look, the Jews built a golden calf. What do you need more? You're talking about Yom Kippur. They built a golden calf, the cardinal sin that deserves the death penalty. You're supposed to die before you worship, idol worship. They built a golden calf. And yes, God said cause and effect. They now define their own destiny. And Moshe Rabbeinu, nevertheless, goes up on the mountain and begs and beseeches God, and he gains forgiveness. And that's why Yom Kippur is the holiest day of the year. So if you're asking about that, that's a whole other discussion. How tshuva can so-called bypass the program of the system. It's no different than, God forbid, somebody has an injury, and today with medical miracles or medical advancements, you can do surgery or medications that can reverse something that years ago would have killed the person. I mean, just giving an example. So though there's a system in place, the system does not change because we have the power to reach into the highest levels and correct it through tshuva. The system is still necessary. So you're asking about tshuva. As I said, it's another discussion. What he's talking here is about the realities of our actions and the reactions it affects above in the regular process of, I've given you life, follow my laws, and and blessings will come your way. That concept. What we call reward and punishment, you can call this cause and effect.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
He doesn't give a time, it could be over 1,000 years or it could be immediate. Still a very fuzzy thing to us. How immediate is the reaction that we ourselves cause?
Because he's not coming to discuss that. That's not the discussion. Remember, the discussion here is our relationship with God and how that relationship impacts each other. I understand everybody's personalizing it here and applying it, but I'm trying to stick to what the Maimer is coming to explain. There's a lot of questions you could ask. A question about tshuva that was just asked. How fast? He's not getting into it, doesn't discuss it. Is it accumulative? Is it generational? But the general concept is basically, let's go back to the concept. If you behave in a healthy way, you will have a healthy life. If you behave in an unhealthy way, God forbid, you'll have an unhealthy reaction. As I said before, someone consumes toxins, it's going to have consequences. If they consume healthy food, it's going to have consequences. It's essentially what he's saying here. It's just that most of us don't relate to mitzvahs and Torah that way. But the same thing spiritually, a mitzvah is a connection. You do a mitzvah, you're connecting to a divine energy that brings health into your life, spiritual health, physical health. And when you do a transgression, you're basically it's like you're damaging your own machine. It's like putting your hand in fire or pouring water into your computer. So it's going to have consequences. That's the general
We've
concept.
always learned that.
Now you could ask questions. Why then is it?
things.
Why then is it? You could ask the question, why is it then that many good people suffer and many bad people prosper? It's a fair question. But that is independent. That's not Ayin Beis discussion. That's a discussion of its own that deserves plenty of conversation. Ayin Beis is explaining the dynamics of the process of the whole idea where God says, live this way, and this will bring you the blessing. Like he's saying here, Asa mitzvah achas, and yachri l'kav schus.
Yeah, but we always learned that the mitzvahs, that a mitzvah, the reward is in
He's not talking about the reward of mitzvahs. It doesn't. Where do you see? He's talking about the effect of mitzvah.
Yeah,
You
but
bring the mitzvah.
we said
Listen,
we
the
bring
Gemara
out good
says,
by doing something
one
good.
second. The Gemara says when you do a mitzvah, it tips the scale of merit to you. So, are you asking a question on the Gemara or on Ayin Beis?
No, I'm asking the question, the general thing that we always learned that you do that the reward of a mitzvah we don't see until with a couple of exceptions, a couple of like long life, kibbutz, cool. But
first of all, where does it say here that he's not? Who says he's not telling you where the reward comes, where it doesn't come? He's just saying that
I understand it. That's why I had a question. It said
he's not discussing that here. Here he's discussing the idea where our actions reach and what impact they have. Like the Medrash says. Anyway, any question you have is not on Ayin Beis, it's on the Medrash. The Medrash says that from the time God said, Eina sati lefanecha es hachayim, so from then on, our actions generate good or negative. How it generates and when it generates deserves its own discussion. He's not going there here. He's not discussing that here. That's all I'm saying. I didn't say it doesn't deserve conversation.
No, it's just that we want to know because we want to be able to do it. That's all.
You know what? So if you really want to know and you should learn it. It's a whole topic that there are many sources that discuss it at length. I'm here to teach Ayin Beis. If I was here giving a talk in general, it's another thing. I'm trying to focus on Ayin Beis. To me, that's challenging enough. That's my role here as the teacher of Ayin Beis.
Totally.
Does Ayin Beis evoke conversation about many subjects? Absolutely. But I'm right now trying to understand the pshat here. We could have a conversation after we understand what he's saying. We can then talk about this or refer you to other places where it's discussed. That's all. I'm trying to keep, steer the ship based on what we're learning here.
I totally understand. Thank you, Rabbi.
So I don't have a problem discussing any of these topics. As you know, I don't really retreat from any topic. I'm happy to talk about anything. I just like to put things into context. As I said, the biggest question is not when you get the reward. Why is it that we don't see the reward? If we're doing good things, when you eat something healthy, you pretty much see the reward immediately. You eat something, God forbid, poisonous, you're going to see the effect immediately. Why don't we see the effect? That's a fair question. That's really the question that you're all asking, on one hand. And then, if you did something wrong, what can be done about it? The concept of tshuva. That's part of the broader question. So it's true. We learned earlier, schar mitzvah b'hai al meleka, that we don't have a reward of mitzvah in this world, except with a few exceptions that you pointed out. He did discuss that at length. Now remember also, even when we say the schar will be revealed, Mashiach come, doesn't mean we don't have schar now. It just means it may not be fully revealed. And for some people, elam chatir b'chayecha, it is revealed to some extent. But point being here, the most important point is that our actions matter. And where do they matter? Where they have direct impact is Malchus, the Tiklah, the wheel. That's the real punchline he wants to say here. So as I said, I'm happy to discuss it, but I would prefer first explaining as we learn at Ayin Beis here, and then we'll see if we have ability, we can broaden the topic. Either it's relevant in this class or I can refer you to other classes. How does that sound?
Great. Thank you.
Okay. Oh, it's 10:30 already. Wow. I'm just looking. The Biur HaZeir of the Tzemach Tzedek definitely adds to this. But I would prefer, I'm going to stop here anyway because it's the time. The next paragraph is going to be by Inyan Hu. He's going to explain this. And I think after he explains it, maybe, if need be, we may go to the Biur HaZeir just to see how the Tzemach Tzedek elaborates, just for comparative purposes, as I've done a number of other times. But we'll decide that later. I'm not sure right now. Okay, we'll stop here. End of the paragraph on page 1430. Any other questions? Anybody else want to weigh in?
Rabbi Jacobson, I just have one quick question. This is, I think it's Ayin Beis related. Rabbi Rashab discussed extensively that when a Jew says Yehi Amen Yehi Shemer Rabbah, that they're able to tap in to levels higher than even the creative powers of Hashem for creating this world. How does that fit into what we just discussed? I understand that our actions determine how we, in other words, whatever we do, it's a mirror, and we get it, according, and it has nothing to do with the creator. I get all that. I get the wheel. I get all that. I just want to reconcile, how does this fit into that idea that goes beyond even the power of creation?
A very good question, and it is very fitting here, actually. I believe this will become clear as we continue learning in Ayin Beis. But being that it's an important question, let me respond briefly. I mentioned yesterday, and I mentioned a number of times, that our avodah reaches the deepest levels in Atzmus. Nesava Kadosh Baruch Hu, Liyisleis Baruch Dir B'Tachteinim, is in Atzmus. He desires a home in this world. So when we build a home, his desire is being fulfilled. However, as I explained it there, you can't call it an impact on God. That's more God on his terms. You're doing what he desired. We're talking here impact as in we are actually affecting, like we would affect one another. Like I could affect you, you can affect me, because we're both in the same domain, in the same world. So the difference is that when you say as we learned earlier, that's when the neshamas are accessing their source that's higher than all these levels, than the malachim and Malchus and Atzilus and Eini Ha'eda, and higher than Torah. Like I mentioned before with Tshuva, we have the ability to reach there, but that reaching is of a different sort. There you're invoking and drawing down a very high level of energy, not because that energy is affected by us. Malchus is the place where we engage. Remember, in the interface, it would be like asking, since God can make miracles, why do we need to have nature? Why is there nature? Why does the sun come up every morning? Every part of existence, every organism has its natural structure and parameters. Because the kavanah is to transform the world on its terms, not on God's terms. So we're discussing here is the relationship on our terms, how God put into motion through the wheel, this whole process. Your action causes a reaction of Malchus, which in turn draws down chesed into your life, or gvura. Then there's another track, and that is that when a neshama, once it goes through all these levels, and here we're talking about how the angels process the energy and so on, that neshama, after it climbs step by step from Malchus, it's now impacting and drawing down chesed and gvura on our terms, like more like a mamala kalam, and then you have the ability to reach sevav kalam and all the way to etzem. And there, it's not because you impacted it, because there's the concept of impact doesn't exist. There, the concept of God's will exists. That's what he wants. Like we said before, it's not on the terms of creation, that's on God's terms. And that is also our power. That's ultimately how you more than reconcile. It's two stages or several stages in the process of the interface. Now, as I explained, we spoke how the neshamas are high on those higher levels, all the way lifnei atzimtzum, all the way, like you said, and now he's coming back to how the neshamas are descending below into existence, and how the divine interacts with them on those terms.
Thank you so much. That's actually was amazing. That was perfect. It's like a sovev and mamalik, like there's encompassing and then there's
Well, it's
the
mamala
internal life.
sevev atzmus, mamala sevev etzem.
Yeah, exactly.
And we must go from the bottom up ultimately. That doesn't mean there aren't times that we can draw from the top down. But generally speaking, first you have to deal with the nefesh habamis. We have an animal soul to deal with here. Like he said, the Ava V'yira and all our avodah is not easy in this world. Once we master it on our terms, then yes, new vistas will open up. And I believe he will discuss this. This is really the theme as we go along. These 2 dimensions or 3 dimensions in the interface. How God works with us on our terms, and then in turn, how we then can draw all the way up to the highest levels. Remember, we spoke mutfa, murgish, muskel. You begin first on your terms, then you ultimately reach midas, and midas then are elevate the moichin to gaze at arechampin and atik and keser and the highest levels, the shin, ayin, nehirin, the 370 energy lights, and so on. So this is a process of maturity. You can't reach age 40 where you reach the perception of understanding your teacher's deeper intent until you first go through Ben Chamish Lemikra and Ben Eser Lemishnah. We simply have to go through the steps. So here he's talking about those steps, and where Malachim play a critical role because they help us through their processing. They help us both draw down the energy and also elevate the energy. Bottom line is, you want first a relationship with God that you can relate to, then you expand your horizons and you expand your containers and your consciousness to receive higher levels of the divine, higher, to the point that you can even experience God himself, where God says that no one can see me and live, but by not looking, you can even experience that, as we've discussed a number of times. I'll stop here, end of the paragraph on page 1430.